This is another podcast from Alpha Business Media. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place that, cuts through all that information noise to get you the essential knowledge, the stuff you really need to be properly informed. Today we're diving deep, really deep, into something complex, something pretty important with ripples around the world, Nepal's anti-corruption crackdown. And we're asking, I think, the core question here. Is what we're seeing, is this a genuine breakthrough? Could it actually change the country? Or is it? What is it just more political theater? Another flash in the pan in Nepal's long fight with corruption. Basically, can Nepal finally break free from what some are calling this vicious circle of impunity?
Yeah, and to help you get your head around this critical moment, we've pulled together quite a stack of sources. This deep dive, it's built on a really detailed analytical study looking at political patronage, plus the latest reports from big international players, Transparency International, the World Bank, the IMF. And we've also got analyses of these specific, really high-profile cases that have just, rocked Nepal recently. Our goal here is to basically distill the key insights from all of this to give you a clear but also nuanced picture of what's actually happening.
Okay, so let's unpack this because, before we talk about any crackdown, we really need to understand the problem itself, right? Just how deep does this corruption issue go in Nepal?
Exactly. And the sources, they're really clear on this. Corruption in Nepal, it's not new. It's systemic. It's like a chronic illness, really deeply rooted in history, patronage, nepotism, cronyism. And this stuff didn't vanish when the monarchy ended. It just sort of persisted, even evolved under the multi-party democracy. Yeah. And it constantly undermines stability, potential for prosperity. It's led to this huge crisis of confidence across the country in their own democratic institutions. Nepal's really at a crossroads.
And we're not just talking feelings or anecdotes here. Is there hard data? Quantifiable stuff that shows the scale?
Oh, yeah. The numbers, they paint a pretty stark picture. Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, the CPI, it consistently ranks Nepal poorly. So in 2023, it was 108th out of 180 countries. Score of 35 out of 100.
35 out of 100, that's low.
It is. And, okay, there was maybe a tiny numerical improvement from 2021 and 2022. But then the 2024 data, the score actually dropped back to 34. So it confirms Nepal isn't just fighting corruption. It seems kind of stuck deep in this systemic rut, still firmly in that rampant corruption category.
Stuck is the word, like spinning wheels.
Pretty much, yeah. Unable to get real traction.
And these pretty grim stats, they've been turbocharged, emotionally anyway, by these massive scandals, haven't they? Cases involving top politicians, former ministers, senior bureaucrats, and crucially, from all the main political parties.
Right.
Which naturally has just fueled huge public anger.
Right.
And it brings us right back to that question we started with. Is this real change, or is it just political rivals settling scores? This is where it gets really worrying, I think, because these aren't just one-offs, are they? The sources suggest they're examples of something deeper, like a kleptocracy. Is that the term?
That's the term some sources use, yeah. A system where the elites, political, business, whatever, they kind of collude to systematically siphon off public resources.
Yeah.
And the fake refugee scam. I mean, it gives you really chilling insight into how that works.
Tell us about that one.
Okay, so you had this criminal network, right? And it included high-ranking officials, politicians, and they just brazenly defrauded over 800 Nepalese citizens, took millions of dollars.
How did they even do it?
The method was just appallingly cynical. They basically faked a government task force report. They added names of Nepalese citizens to these lists, promising them resettlement in the U.S. as Bhutanese refugees, a promise they obviously had no power or intention to keep. They just took the money.
Wow. And a case that big. What does that tell us about the system itself, the vulnerabilities?
It shows how deep the rot goes. I mean, charges were brought against 30 people, including a former deputy prime minister, Top Bahadur Ramaji, a former home minister, Balkrishna Khan, a former top civil servant, Teknarayan Pandey.
Names.
Huge names. And the charges are serious. Treason, organized crime, fraud, forgery. The treason charge is specifically tied to damaging Nepal's image internationally. Over 288 million Nepalese rupees were collected from victims, well over 100 victims identified so far.
Yeah.
But the trial is just dragging on. And there's still a lot of public doubt, will accountability really reach the very top?
It's staggering. But it's not just human trafficking, is it? There's this other huge case involving planes, the wide-body scandal.
Ah, yes, the wide-body scandal. The purchase of 2 big Airbus A330s for Nepal Airlines Corporation, NAC. It was meant to be this symbol of progress, right? Flying the flag. Instead, it became a textbook example of state plunder. Officials, intermediaries, They basically lined their pockets at the state's expense. Two main tricks they used.
Okay.
First, they secretly messed with the technical specs. They bought planes with a lower maximum takeoff weight than planned,
Meaning?
meaning they paid for planes that were less capable for the long-haul flights NAC wanted them for. Basically crippled their ambitions from the start.
So paying top dollar for something that wasn't quite up to snuff.
Exactly. Paying a premium for a less capable product.
Yeah.
And second, the purchase wasn't straight from Airbus.
Yeah.
Oh, no. It was routed through this complex web of middlemen, companies in Portugal, Germany, Moldova, which artificially inflated the price tag by at least $40 million US.
$40 million just skimmed off.
Seems like it. And the consequence.
Yeah.
NAC is now saddled with this massive debt, 31.4 billion Nepali rupees by 2023. There was even an international angle. The head of a U.S. company involved in the deal, AAR Corp, actually pled guilty in the U.S. under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act related to bribes in this deal.
So there's proof of bribery.
Clear proof from the U.S. side, yes. Now, back in Nepal, 11 people were convicted in December 2024, including a former managing director of NAC. But the investigation is supposedly ongoing. And again, there are these widespread fears that the really key political figures behind it all will somehow, slip away again.
And then there's gold. The gold smuggling cases seem to pop up again and again. Another systemic weakness.
Absolutely. These incidents at Kathmandu's Triphuvan International Airport, they just keep happening. And they expose how deep the corruption runs in customs, in law enforcement. We've seen these big seizures, remember, like 60 kilos of gold hidden inside motorcycle brake pads. Another time, 9 kilos stuffed into e-cigarettes.
Crazy methods.
Right. And crucially, these probes have led to some very high-profile arrests, including the vice chairman of the ruling Maoist party, Krishna Bahadur Mahara.
Arresting someone that senior, that must have sent shockwaves.
It certainly did. Reports suggest his arrest was ordered directly by the Interior Minister, Rabi Lamichan, maybe to show they were serious, But here's where it gets really murky and kind of typical, perhaps. Other top politicians, including the current finance minister, have also been accused of being involved in these same smuggling rings.
So everyone's pointing fingers at everyone else.
Pretty much. It creates this tangled mess of mutual accusations. And anti-corruption probes can quickly become just another tool in the political game, selective justice, which of course completely undermines the credibility of the whole crackdown effort. How can the public trust it's genuine when it looks like political score settling?
So if you take these three big ones, the fake refugees, the dodgy planes, the smuggled gold, it paints a really bleak picture, doesn't it? It's not just isolated crooks. It feels systemic, like it touches all parts of government, all the main parties.
That's what's so consistent. The methods messing with procurement, abusing procedures, using your official job for personal gain, and the fact that you see links, direct or indirect, to all the major political forces, CPN, UML, Nepali Congress, the Maoists, it points to what one source called an unspoken inter-party consensus. It suggests it's not just about individual greed. It's this whole political culture built on patronage. Power isn't primarily for public service. It's for handing out favors, protecting illicit activities.
And the fallout goes way beyond just the money lost, right? It hits public trust hard. It undermines the whole idea of democracy.
Massively. The sources mention that 68% of Nepals think the country is heading in the wrong direction. That's a huge number. And you're even hearing calls, believe it or not, for restoring the monarchy.
Yeah.
That's how disillusioned some people are. It's a really dangerous feedback loop. Corruption breeds disillusionment, which then threatens the state itself.
Okay, so given all that, what about the institutions that are supposed to fight this? The watchdogs. You've got the Commission for the Investigation of Abuse of Authority, the CIAA. How's it doing?
The CIA.
Yeah.
It's a real paradox. On paper, it's this powerful constitutional body. Should be a major weapon against corruption. But in practice, its track record is, questionable. Mixed at best. Now, they did show a big jump in activity in the 2023-24 financial year. They filed 201 cases against over 1,500 people, double the previous year.
Sounds good.
Okay. More cases filed. But, and it's a big but, the conviction rate, it's plummeted, absolutely cratered. Back in 2018-19, it was pretty high, over 88%. By 2022-23, it hit a historic low of just 33%.
Wow, 88 down to 33%. That's a collapse. So, lots of investigations, but very few actually sticking. What's going wrong? What's the anatomy of that failure?
Well, the sources point to several really critical systemic issues. The biggest one, the most damaging. Political interference, it's rampant. How the CIA commissioners get appointed, it's deeply political, often part of backroom deals between the main parties.
So not based on merit?
Not primarily, no.
Yeah.
So you end up with people in charge who are seen as, yes men, dependent on the goodwill of the ruling elite. Especially when it comes to investigating the really big fish, the politically connected cases. Like there are reports that investigations into major telecom deals, the Terramont CS case, for example, were basically stalled for months because of huge political pressure.
So the watchdog is basically leashed by the people it's supposed to be watching.
That's a good way to put it, exactly. Then there's this other huge problem. The political decisions. Loophole in the law.
What's that?
It's a clause that says the CIA cannot investigate policy decisions made collectively by the cabinet. And this loophole is actively, cynically exploited to shield corruption. Decisions that clearly benefit specific business groups or individuals get deliberately pushed through the cabinet process.
Just to make them immune from investigation.
Precisely. To give them that legal cover.
Yeah.
Even the CIA itself has admitted this clause is ambiguous and has asked for it to be clarified, but, well, nothing's happened. And one more thing. The focus tends to be on the small fish.
Right.
That big drop in convictions. It's partly linked to a Supreme Court ruling back in 2021 that banned sting operations. Now, before the ban, the CIA used stings a lot, and they had a high success rate with them. But those stings usually caught low-level officials taking pretty small bribes.
So easy wins, but not tackling the big stuff.
Exactly. The ban basically exposed the CIA's fundamental weakness, its inability or maybe unwillingness to really conduct those complex, difficult, grand corruption investigations, the kind that require deep digging, resisting immense political pressure. And that just reinforces the public view that, the big sharks, they always get away.
Okay, so the investigators are compromised, but what if a case does make it through all that? What about the courts? The judiciary should be the final backstop, right?
Well, it should be. But unfortunately, it seems to suffer from similar problems.
Yeah.
There was a really sobering report in 2021 led by a former Chief Justice, Hari Krishna Karki. It found rampant corruption and irregularities within the judiciary itself.
Inside the courts, too.
Yeah, pointing to things like political influence in appointing judges, even instances where judges were allegedly acting as middlemen in corrupt deals themselves. Now, that report made recommendations for reform, like using automated systems to assign cases to judges to stop manipulation. But progress on actually implementing those reforms, it's been incredibly slow, lots of internal resistance.
So if you connect all those dots, the investigators are controlled by the politicians, the law has loopholes for the top brass, and the courts themselves are compromised.
You get what we called earlier, a vicious circle of impunity. The whole system, in effect, seems designed to ensure that serious, high-level anti-corruption efforts will ultimately fail. It almost guarantees it.
And it gets worse, because instead of working together, these institutions often seem to be fighting each other in public.
That's right. You see this public blame game. The CIA blames the special court for the low conviction rates, saying judges aren't weighing evidence properly. The court fires back, saying, no, the cases are falling apart because the CIA's investigations are weak, the evidence isn't there. Even the Bar Association jumps in, accusing the CIA of trying to pressure judges. This constant squabbling, this shifting of blame, it just leads to paralysis and further destroys public trust. No one seems accountable.
Okay, so that's the domestic picture. Pretty bleak. What does all this internal mess mean for Nepal internationally on the world stage?
Well, the link between this kind of deep-seated corruption and Nepal's poor economic performance is just undeniable. The World Bank keeps warning about it. They say unless these structural issues are tackled, Nepal's long-term growth could stay below 4% a year.
And that matters because?
Because it would stop Nepal graduating from its least developed country status, which is a major national goal set for 2026. Corruption basically distorts how resources are used, jacks up business costs, and just suffocates growth potential. It holds the whole economy back. And unsurprisingly, it makes Nepal look like a really high-risk place for foreign investors.
Right.
Think about it. Bureaucracy, zero transparency, laws changing all the time, courts you can't rely on. It creates a terrible climate for foreign direct investment, FDI. The IMF, time and again, highlights strengthening anti-corruption bodies as a top priority for Nepal.
Yeah.
But these calls, they seem to largely go unanswered, or at least not answered effectively.
And you mentioned a really serious international consequence earlier, Nepal being put back on the FATF gray list.
Yes, that's a particularly grave one, with potentially immediate economic fallout. In February 2025, Nepal was re-included on the Financial Action Task Force's gray list.
Just remind us, what exactly is the FATF?
It's basically the global watchdog for money laundering and terrorist financing. They set the standards. Being put on their gray list signals that a country has serious strategic deficiencies in how it handles these issues. Nepal was actually on this list before, from 2008 to 2014. Getting put back on means either past reforms didn't stick or their implementation has seriously slipped. The FATF pointed to specific failures, like not properly regulating high-risk areas like cooperatives and real estate, and ongoing weaknesses in actually prosecuting financial crime.
And what are the real-world consequences of being on that list? For everyday Nepalis, for the economy?
They could be profound, potentially catastrophic, actually. It means much tighter scrutiny on all international transactions involving Nepal that could seriously hinder trade finance. And critically, it could impact remittances, the money sent home by Nepalis working abroad. That's a vital source of foreign currency for the country.
Wow, hitting remittances would be huge.
Absolutely. It also scares off foreign investors and makes getting international loans much harder and more expensive. Nepal now has just 2 years to implement a strict FATF action plan to get off the list. If they fail, they risk being blacklisted, which means even harsher sanctions. It really shows that direct, painful link between domestic failures and major international financial risk.
And beyond finance, what about trust? With development partners, aid organizations?
That erodes too. Big partners, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, ADB, USAID, the UK's FCDO, they all explicitly tie their aid and program success to good governance, to tackling corruption. You see it in reports. The ADB's risk assessments for Nepal consistently flag high threats in public financial management. USAID projects have faced allegations of fund misuse, leading to aid sometimes being frozen. What often happens, according to the sources, is that reforms get pushed through mainly when there's strong pressure from these donors. But as soon as that external pressure eases off, the political will back home tends to fade.
So superficial reforms again?
Often, yes. It feeds that vicious cycle, rather than leading to real, deep institutional change. And finally, we can't ignore the geopolitics here. Nepal's stuck right between India and China, two giants. That location, combined with its ongoing political instability and weak institutions made much worse by corruption, makes Nepal really vulnerable to outside influence. Just look at the controversies around China's Belt and Road Initiative funding in Nepal. It's a clear example of how these governance problems get tangled up with big geopolitical plays, potentially threatening Nepal's own sovereignty and stability in the region.
Okay, so let's bring it all back. After going through all this, the scandals, the institutions, the international fallout, are we seeing real change starting in Nepal? Or is it just, imitation, another cycle?
Well, it's not a simple yes or no, is it? The sources really suggest a complex picture, maybe even a contradictory one right now. On the one hand, you could point to some genuine reasons for, let's say, cautious optimism. I mean, for the first time, really, in Nepal's modern history, you have politicians of the absolute highest rank, we're talking, former deputy PMs, ministers, even a former prime minister actually standing before a court.
Which is unprecedented.
Totally unprecedented. It's a massive crack in that old wall of impunity where the big fish just assumed they were untouchable. And these cases, let's be clear, they didn't happen in a vacuum. They happened because of intense public pressure, fueled by the media, by civil society groups, and even the CIA, despite its flaws, has shown some proactive moves in certain cases, like the Monarchy water project investigation. So, yes, there are definitely cracks appearing.
Okay, cracks are appearing, but there's always a but, isn't there? The fundamental problems we talked about, they're still there, right? Threatening to stop any real momentum.
It's exactly. That's the other side of the coin. The fundamental issues remain largely untouched. Anti-corruption bodies like the CIA, still deeply vulnerable to political influence, especially in how their leaders are chosen. That political decision loophole in the law, still wide open, acting as a shield for top officials. Many investigations are still widely seen as politically motivated, less about justice, more about taking down rivals.
Right, the credibility issue.
Huge credibility issue. And the conviction rate for the really complex, high-level cases, still dismally low. The justice system itself, as that Karki report showed, needs radical systemic reform. And maybe the biggest obstacle, the fact that all the major political parties seem to be implicated one way or another. It creates this system of mutual protection. You don't investigate my guy, I won't investigate yours. It makes full, impartial accountability incredibly difficult to achieve.
So it sounds like Nepal is balanced on a knife edge. These trials, they could be a breakthrough moment, a potential turning point. But it feels incredibly fragile because the underlying system, the institutions, they're still basically wired to protect the powerful, not really hold them to account.
That's the crux of it.
Yeah.
So the real test for you, the listener watching this unfold, isn't just counting how many big names get arrested. It's what happens next. Do these cases actually lead to significant convictions, real consequences for powerful people, breaking that historical pattern? And maybe even more importantly, do these scandals become the catalyst for the deep, painful institutional reforms that are needed. We're talking genuine independence for the CIA, closing those legal loopholes for good,
Yeah.
a real cleanup of the judiciary, dismantling those patronage networks that fuel the whole system.
Because if that doesn't happen, then this current flurry of anti-corruption activity, however encouraging it seems right now, could just end up being another bright but ultimately short chapter in Nepal's very long, very sad history of corruption.
Exactly. The international community, investors, donors, they're watching. But most importantly, the people of Nepal are watching very, very closely, hoping perhaps that this time might actually be different.
So something to think about as we wrap up. Consider how that delicate dance between political power, public pressure, and institutional strength plays out in any country. What does it really take to break free from a vicious circle of impunity and actually forge a new path towards transparency and accountability?